second chapter of The Quest for the White Merle, the Little Red Sock. Barney was much better than his word. He had made no promises, nor had he held out any hopes of helping Conrad to find the wonderful White Merle. But, for all that, he had been very busy on his behalf. He woke him at early dawn with a prolonged call under his window. "Toot-toot, toot-toot," he cried, and Conrad, dressing himself quickly while still only half awake, went to him in the garden. A small west wind was swaying the flowers, and a bevy of white and purple pansies lifted their fragrant heads towards the sky. In the east was a curtain of rose colour and amber clouds, with golden sails swam in a sea of green above it. Conrad had never been out quite so early before, and held his breath with pleasure as 1,000 dewdrops caught the light and flashed into sparkling diamonds. "Listen to me," said Barney solemnly, keeping well in the shadow of a rhododendron bush. "Behind the belt of silver birches, by the King Cup meadow, is a fairy ring, and in the very centre of this you will find a pair of wings. These are for you." "For me?" cried Conrad. "For me to fly with?" "For you to fly with," repeated Barney. "I assembled the birds of the air, and reminded them how your father had always loved them, and shown them kindness. Fain would they help him in his need. And at last a tender-hearted swallow proposed that each should spare you a single feather, so that you too might have power to fly. The suggestion was received with gladness, and these wings of love will carry you wherever you may wish to go. If there should still be a White Merle in existence, you will surely find her." Before Conrad could ask another question, Barney had gone. He vanished as noiselessly as if he had been a ghost, and Conrad crossed the lawn and entered the wood beyond, where much twittering and chirping told that the birds were wide awake. Many a pair of bright dark eyes watched him from mossy nests or waving branches, and as he neared the silver birches the twittering grew louder still. In the very centre of the fairy ring lay a soft garment of feathers, with 2 brownish wings flicked here and there with a spot of colour. Swallows and swifts, blackbirds and finches, glossy pheasants and owls and hawks had each and all of them given a feather, and the robins had spared some of the choicest from their crimson breasts. Conrad clasped the wings on his shoulders and slipped the little tunic over his head. It was soft and warm and clung closely to him. He felt as light as air. A knowing blackbird with a particularly golden beak walked round and round him, twittering satisfaction. "Most excellent," he cried. "The wood elves have surpassed themselves. Your wings will carry you safely from thousands of miles, for every feather brings a good wish with it." A plump little robin, he was one of those that Conrad had fed through the winter, fluttered out of a thorn bush. His sweet little song was full of thankfulness, and Conrad was delighted when he perched himself on his right shoulder, just where the feathers began to spring. "I am coming with you," the robin chirped, "lest you should be lonely when you cross the sea, or on a dark, dark night when the starlight is very cold. My name is Gladheart, and I will be your faithful friend." "Come then," said Conrad, and as the sun slowly mounted the gorgeous throne in the east, his beautiful wings bore him over the trees and up, up, up through the radiant sky, until the forest beneath him seemed only a tiny speck. Conrad had no idea where he was going. The rush of wind in his face told him that he was travelling at a great pace, and the robin snuggled against his throat for warmth. Now he was passing over the sea. Far down below him he caught a glimpse of the sparkling water and the foamy white horses on the crest of the waves. The seagulls greeted him with surprised welcome, but he could not stop. His wings cleft the buoyant air like arrows sped from a bow, and the joy of swift movement thrilled him with rapture. Now he was sailing over high mountains of shining ice, the towering giants of the land of the midnight sun. Trickling waterfalls shone like pale ribbons of blue and silver in the deep valleys where forests of fir and birch and oak and hazel stood out in the varying shades of green. As Conrad stayed his flight for a moment over a lofty crag, Gladheart, twittering in his ear, told him that they were crossing Norway. "And here in this very mountain," he added with bated breath, "lives the golden eagle, king of the air." As Conrad approached the eyrie, a roughly formed nest of sticks on the extreme edge of a rocky ledge, the golden eagle rose majestically. He was a magnificent bird, his rich brown plumage flecked with burnished gold at the back of his head and neck, and his brilliant eyes were as steady and unflinching as the sun itself. His powerful wings, rounded off at the ends, reached to the tip of his tail, and a festoon of feathers down to his toes graced his legs. As Conrad accepted his invitation to tarry a while in his eyrie, two downy young eaglets, the first to be hatched in that part of the world, nestled close behind him, echoing his shrill hoarse cry in their piping voices. There was not too much room, for the nest was littered with many whitening bones, and Conrad did not care to sit on these. The golden eagle gazed at his guest's wings curiously. "I see a feather that belongs to one of our family," he said. "It is that of a buzzard. What induced him to part with it, and why is it that you have wings at all?" Conrad told him how generous the birds had been, and as he listened, the king of the air outstretched his own great wings until they formed two splendid flags. Conrad had read of the bronze and silver eagles that the Romans so often had carried to victory, and how Napoleon's triumphant legion had also carried great gilded eagles before them instead of banners. He could see now how regal these must have looked. The eagle closed his wings again, and a patch of brown far down the mountainside suddenly arrested his attention. In another moment he had shot into the air, and in the valley a white-eared rabbit dashed from bush to bush of coarse wild heather in a vain attempt to escape his swiftly falling fate. Conrad drew back regretfully. "Poor little creature," he cried, but the eaglets opened their hungry beaks. A meal never came amiss to them. A rapid whirring of wings announced the return of both parents at the same time. The mother, slightly larger in build than her mate, brought two fat lemmings which the eaglets greedily devoured, first pecking out their eyes and then tearing their skin to pieces. Conrad had decided to stay with them no longer, since he did not like the way they fed, when, in the tangle of driftwood that formed the eagle's nest, he saw a small red sock. It was just the size of a baby's foot. He thought of the fate of the lemmings and the white-eared rabbit, and his face grew pale. He felt that he could not go on until he had learnt the worst. The eaglets had finished their meal now, and the king of the air sailed off on a leisurely journey on his own account. His consort, who had seen the direction of Conrad's gaze, caught up the tiny sock and tossed it over the precipice. "That belongs to Kara's baby," she said, spreading her beautiful tail and preening her feathers in the sunshine. "A small, soft thing with eyes like bits of blue sea, and a voice as feeble as that of a newborn lamb. Kara and her mate, a Laplander like herself, tend a herd of reindeer on the mountainsides, moving from place to place in search of the Arctic moss on which these creatures feed. Sigmund is little and dark and fierce, for the Lapps are said to be the smallest race in Europe, their tallest men being but 5 feet high. Kara thinks him the finest man in the world, and when that scrap of a baby was born to them, she was besides herself with joy, singing queer little songs to it that she had learnt from the brook by the willows. Later on, she often left it to sprawl in the sunshine on a bed of conifer needles, while she carried her man his dinner, wrapped in a scarlet cloth. One day, the silly little thing tied up the baby in the cloth for fun, and instead of the black rye bread and strips of reindeer flesh that Sigmund expected, he found a soft pink scrap, a baby, that he wouldn't have put his teeth in to save his life. He pretended anger, and while he chased Cara around a belt of conifers, one of her comrades picked up the baby and hid it behind a flowering bush. The baby did not cry, but cooed softly and shut its little hands as if to catch the sunbeams. As I flew across the valley to seek my lord, who was away on a hunting expedition, the eagle continued, I must have dropped a feather beside the very spot where Cara had left the baby. When she returned and found her darling gone, she beat her breast with anguish. Then, when her man had left her to seek his mates and tell them what had happened, she stayed her weeping and ran to the mountainside where she had often seen us poised on the edge of our nest. The rocks are steep, and see how the precipice yawns sheer below. Yet, in some way of her own, my lord and I have greatly wondered how that little mother scrambled up until she reached our eyrie. That she ever got down alive again is a marvel to us. But as I flew over the valley with my lord, I heard the sound of sobbing, and there was Sigmund kneeling beside her, and kissing her feet that the rocks had torn. The baby lay in her arms, cooing away as happily as ever. But how did the little red sock come here? Conrad asked with a sigh of relief. It had caught on a branch that my lord brought up while we were making our nest, returned the golden eagle. Did you think, she went on with a touch of royal scorn, that I had swooped down and carried that baby away myself? The tales you hear of eagles bearing children to their nests are foolish myths told by idle folk who should know better. Conrad stroked the little eaglets gently, and Gladheart, who had kept very quiet since he had been in the eagle's nest, gave a little twitter of satisfaction. The liquid song of a small brown lark soaring high above them reminded Conrad of the object of his journey. Have you seen a white merle? He asked the eagle, who had spread herself over her nestlings now and was staring dreamily into the sun. She does not live here, the great bird answered, or I should have surely heard her sing. There are owls, and buzzards, and snipe, and teal. Sparrowhawks nest in the rugged heights, and crows and ravens wheel round the birchwoods and utter their hoarse, shrill cries in the early morning. There are loons by the lake, lapwings and plovers in the meadow. Thousands of songbirds come here in spring, but never a white merle. Perhaps the black guillemot can give you news of her, she went on after a pause. He flies far out to sea beyond the breakers, and all the seabirds are his friends. The auks are his near relation, and they are very knowing. So Conrad spread his wings again, the golden eagle first giving him one of her feathers for a keepsake. He flew in a zigzag course over glaciers whose depths gleamed with rose and emerald and deepest blue, over marvellous antlered fjords and brimming lakes, over mile upon mile of stately forest where spruce and conifer braved the winter cold, and the bright sun warmed him, and his wings were strong. The first black guillemot he saw was sunning himself in a fissure of the cliffs in company with his bride, who coyly retreated at the sight of a stranger. He was a dapper little fellow, some 14 inches long, with his legs placed so far back that he appeared to stand erect. His webbed and three-toed feet were coral red, his graceful neck and head were shaped somewhat like a duck's, and a bar of pure white feathers across his wings stood out in strong relief against the ebon blackness of the rest of his plumage. "Ever been in these parts before?" he asked, looking at Conrad critically. When he learnt that this was Conrad's first visit to Norway, he quite unbent and began to tell of glorious nights when the sun turned the sea to fire and every ripple on its surface was a dancing flame. Of the long, long winter, when for 7 or 8 weeks the sun did not rise above the horizon, and the land was in darkness save for the wonderful northern lights that spanned the sky with a brilliant arc, and turned the snow-covered heights into wonderland. "As summer is very short," he said, "but for 3 months now the sun will never set. Though the valleys here are filled with songbirds and the land is very fair, we love the frozen north, where the towering ice ships are blue as steel, and the roar of the waves is stilled." "Would the White Merle be there, I wonder?" asked Conrad eagerly. "I have not heard of her," said the guillemot, swaying a little as a strong breeze blew in from the shore. "But the gulls might help you, for they know the seas even better than I do, and the rocky islands where they breed are far north from Maine. The White Merle may have flown there for refuge." A rainbow-hued fish flickered its gleaming tail in the swell of a wave. The guillemot darted through the air like a streak of darkness and dived after it. A second later he reappeared and his mate joined him. Together they flew off over the tossing sea, and Gladheart murmured to Conrad that they too would go north the next day. "We must sleep now," said the little creature. "I saw a bank of moss by a hedge of wild berries as we crossed the last valley, and I heard the humming of bees. They will give you some of their honey, and thus you will be both rested and refreshed." So Conrad flew down to a sheltering valley and stretched himself on a bank of thick green moss. The honey the wild bees gave him was very sweet, and he took many sips of the evening dew in the flower cups the robin brought him. Very soon he fell into a deep sleep, and when he woke the day was well advanced.